Susana, yes. Thank you, Antonio.
Hi again. So where do we draw the line of what we show?
Well, obviously, it's a really good question. I think, you know, if you work in an institute which is pretty close. Sorry.
You have to speak closer to the mic.
Okay.
Exactly.
I think Frank Sinatra. No.
It has to be on as well.
It is on. So I guess, you know, if you're an institute which today is pretty closed and don't talk about it, the leap between there and 2 days later having invasive research on your video, on your website, is a bit of a leap. So my guess would be this, would be, and this is based on a lot of experience, you would bring together the key decision makers within the institution. So it would be a leading scientist, maybe the Vice Chancellor of Research, the Communications Department, maybe some of the Ethics Board, and say, okay, today, where do we stand? What do we do about our animal research? How open are we? Where would we like to be in 1 year's time? And what are the kind of steps we need to take between then and getting there? So it may be that, for example, and this was common, less common now, the most research institutions, when they media release some research, they don't mention the animal. They say animal model or something. My guess is that the first step would be, if it's a mouse, if it's a rat, if it's a zebrafish, just mention the animal. And the animal's never the story. It's never guinea pig saves the world. But if an animal model's been used in the research, just mention it. Or it could be have a good animal welfare statement on your website. It could be put up a picture from your own facility of a mouse or a rat or something, and then just see what the response is. And my guess is that nobody will even notice. Nobody will even notice. So it's a kind of step-by-step process. I mean, I agree on the point made before about nobody's saying you have to have the most gratuitous images on your website. As somebody said, you know, if you're a heart surgeon or you're a brain surgeon, you don't particularly want to see that in front of you. But my last point I'm making, other people can comment. Context is everything. You know, the context is everything. So you know, an image without explanation is no good. You need to put the context in with it. And I think that step-by-step approach, you need to sensitize institutions to say, look, we're going to be open, and these are the small steps we're going to take to get there. And I would say that's a cast-iron strategy of doing it right, actually.
So I can tell you that where I drew the line when I was the head of the institutional communication as well, was that we were not showing images of procedures. So we were showing images of animals. If a journalist would go to the institute, if they wanted to film a mouse, that would be okay, but the mouse would have to be inside the cage. It was not these things of removing the mouse from out of the cage and putting in the hands of a scientist just to. I don't like that part. Now is it Paulo? So that was something that we didn't want. So filming our pictures inside the cages. The animal needs to be in a healthy state, not an animal that is just submitted to a procedure. So these are just common things, and then also being more cautious. Like you don't have the name of any scientist in the cage. So if a journalist is taking pictures, just be careful with that as well, not to expose your scientists that are already working with animals. So these are tiny little things, but we never said to our scientists to not talk about it, not at all. We even encourage them to talk about it. But I think that here is a line. They can talk about the procedures that they are doing, but showing some procedures, I'm not sure if it will be beneficial.
Just a short comment. I think it will go back to what we've been discussing, which is about the trust and the media. That if it's about a media, which media it is, which journalist, the objective. I think it will depend on that. I don't want to give names or very specific examples for Portugal, but you know that it's very different if you're talking to TVA or TVB or the journalists from this newspaper or from this other one. So I guess you will have to adjust to that.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that was said. I think, I don't know, I was just having a conversation outside regarding this subject. Even within scientists, like within the scientific community, there's no need to show everything that we do, in the sense that there's some procedures, for example, some surgeries, that there's absolutely no point in showing a picture during a talk to people, like about exactly what we're doing, unless there's a scientific reason for showing that procedure. So like showing a scheme of what you're doing, that works as well as showing exactly the procedure. Again, I think there's absolutely no reason to be like trying to be sensationalista, like trying to like just shock people by showing something. I think the main point here is really say like this research was done on this animal, and rather than really showing exactly everything that you do. Because there's so many details that you are not going to be able to provide, for example, in a talk or something. So it's not about hiding, but again, if there's a scientific reason to show it, then I think you should show it. But most of the times, there's actually no scientific reason for showing a procedure or something like that. So then I don't see any reason for I don't know, being very explicit about what you're doing. And it's not about hiding, it's just like there's actually no need to show it. But again, it really is going to depend on the situation. So I like, for example, showing the behavior, like if I'm talking to students in high school, but then there's no need of showing a photo of the surgery moment where I'm implanting the electrodes, or because I don't think you gain anything from that too. So I don't know, I think it should be adjusted to the situations.
I think we have another question here. Please use this. Don't put it too close.
I'll try. I'll not do it. Thank you. I think that I just want to have a small comment to what Mena said. I think it's very important to encourage the scientists to speak about the use of animal models. But I think on the other hand, we also have to be a little bit careful. There should be always some communication made in line with the communication officers, so that there is some guidance, because you also don't want that there will be dissonant communication from one institution, because one scientist might have arrived from somewhere else that had a different politics, and there's a different view. What we hear sometimes are saying that you still need common sense. Common sense is something that's quite heterogeneous. So it's just a minor added comment that I think it's very, very relevant, and sessions like these are very helpful for us.
I just wanted to add to the discussion, because I have personal experience on this. So I teach a developmental biology course in a master's, okay? And of course we are talking about, it's not general public, it's science students, but they're on the third year, well, fourth year of their university degrees. So most of them, this is a molecular genetics course, so most of them will go into molecular biology, genetics. They don't even, bacteria, they don't even want to work with animals. And they're very ignorant about the use of animals. And we're talking about future scientists, okay? So I teach developmental biology, but it's very difficult to do practical courses of developmental biology without introducing models. So I decided that I wanted to do practical classes with zebrafish. And because I want to do this, I had to put a theoretical practical on place to talk about animal research. And in fact, I teach to these kids everything about the 3 R's, everything about the transparency agreements, and all of this at the university. And all these questions like, we are using, why are you exposing animals to this stress? I have to take the animals to the site of the classes. So of course they are exposed, but the first thing we teach, or I try to convey this information before even they ask, is first, these animals should have been sacrificed. They've been raised for experiments, they've been used in experiments, and they would not be alive. They were just saved for the purpose of training. Okay, so this is on the 3 R's. We're reusing the animals. So this, in fact, closes the question, and they don't have a problem with this. Okay, so, and then we have to educate, of course, I mean, a lot of people forget that the fish are vertebrates, but they are. So the fish, in fact, with the noise of the class, the fish go to the top of the bottom of the tanks. They get stressed, and in fact, it's a good timing to explain them how we can affect the animals. So they need to be quiet, they need to do things calmly, and they have to respect the animals. And they learn this intuitively. We don't, I mean, and it's kind of funny because then I teach on our animal experimentation courses for their accreditation when they start here as researchers. Some of them were my students before. They've heard this before. And it's amazing because they don't forget. They may forget everything I taught about developmental biology, but they will not forget this. And this is, in fact, been very, very rewarding for me. I don't know, I was told that there's not many master courses that teach this, and scientific publication, which is something that they're also completely ignorant. But this is, I mean, the sooner we start, the better. And in fact, it starts with very ignorant, like, but do we have to use animals? There's alternative things. And then we can discuss on this, and at the end of a 3-hour class, their minds are completely different. The speech is completely different. So I think I cannot see myself as a scientist without this training and this education role. Otherwise, I'm not fulfilling my job.
Thank you, Anna.
I mean, I really...
Sorry, yeah, you want to comment on that?
I really agree with that, and I really echo it. And I think there's a real problem, I think, in terms of education and training, the move away from using research animals, which is now accepted everywhere. And I think EARA should take seriously how we can change that, because I think it's problematic that people advancing through science only late in their careers are actually allowed to look at.
Okay, I have a question here first. João, sorry, this lady here.
Thank you. So we're talking most about like opposition from the public of a non-scientific background, but what's the percentage of scientists that are opposing animal research? And how can you approach them? Like, what's the limit that you show, or are these organizations that defend animal welfare being led by other scientists that left, I don't know, academia or something?
Very good point, thank you.
And the point you're trying to make to their audience isn't that animal research is the answer to everything, but animal research has played an integral part in every significant biomedical scientific development that improves humans and animal life. So, and that brings home to people, they may not want to think about it too much, but they can see that the whole 150 people are sat down, the role animal research plays. And I won the debate, but any of you could have won that debate, because when you present those facts, even in front of a doctor, it's hard to escape it, the reality of it. Sure.
Wait. Mike.
So I am a researcher, so I'm doing my doctorate, and I'm not very comfortable with animal research. So I switched models, obviously, because I wasn't comfortable. But if I were in your audience, I could have said, yes, that was in the past. So science was quite brutal in the past, not just with animals, but with humans. And what other people are saying is there are new methods that are trying to reduce animal research. So what's the point of trying to push it? I'm not saying that, actually, but what's the point of trying to push it further if you can develop or add more sources or funding to develop in other types of research that do not involve animals?
So maybe Susana, do you want to comment on this, please?
Sorry, then I will have to leave too. But I think that is also our responsibility as scientists to fund those and to push forward those initiatives. Like that has, like, if I could do all my work not in animals, I will do it not in animals. But I cannot, like the questions that we are addressing, cannot be done in a dish. So I completely agree with you. And we as scientists, we have to push for that for that to happen. Like the same way that, like, whatever, like we were okay with slaves, like, you know, like many hundreds of years ago, and we are not okay now. And also, like, many of the things that we do now like the procedures are very different. Even in my lifetime, yeah, like in 20 years since I started doing research, the rules changed quite a lot, and that is really, really important. And I completely advocate for that. So I just think like essentially
we should all embrace alternative methods and push for them. Susana, Anna, yes, please.
So you were asking how many scientists don't want to. I don't recall exactly the numbers, but in that survey that we did in 2011, I think it was, you know, about 5% that said that they were against animal research. But then we had several levels. So if you agree, do you agree that animals can be used for any purpose? They can be used just for this specific. And then there were several levels of people saying that the minority was those people that were saying that it can be used for all purposes. No, those that approved use of animals, they also had some restrictions. And then we also asked, so in what type of species, if you would be working with animals, in what species would you like to work, or what species you would never work? And again here, even those that said that, you know, I agree with animal research, they also had different levels of commitment, and it was a really few percentage that said that they could work with all species. This is one thing. And then we also did a focus group, or several focus groups, and in these focus groups we were talking to scientists that were working with animals and scientists that were not working with animals. And I remember that some scientists were saying that, you know, I have to work with animals, and there are days that I cry because I don't want to work with animals, and it's very hard for me to work with them. So I really need to stop and think, why am I doing this? And then I remember, why am I doing this? And I continue my job. That's exactly. And I think this is something that perhaps in society, when they think that there are scientists working with animals, they just see that these scientists are just bad guys, that they don't love animals. But it's not true. Many scientists that are working with animals, they are biologists. We have vets working with animals, and you know, these people also have pets. They also like animals. So I think that when we are starting to have a discussion, we should also show the human side of the scientist. The other thing that you were saying is, how can we convince scientists that animal research is good? And I'm not sure if this is our role to convince them. I think that we all should be trying to find alternatives to the use of animals. And I think that if those alternatives exist, then scientists will use them. So we don't need to convince them how to use, but actually perhaps we need to convince them to invest more time in trying to find alternatives.
That's fine. So on the question of alternatives, I mean, obviously the existing legislation says that you can't use an animal if there's a non-animal model. That's the first thing. And secondly, the irony of the whole situation about alternatives and non-animal models is that it's scientists themselves who come up with non-animal models. There's not one non-animal model of research being developed by PETA or Cruelty-Free International or Doctors Against Animal Research, all these kind of pressure groups. It's a scientific community who come up with ways and means to reduce, replace, refine, and move away from animal models. It's not the animal rights groups themselves, it's the scientists. And it's not my job to convince you to use animal models. If you think there's a better way of progressing your science, then proceed. You know.
Are there burning questions from the audience? Maybe I'll take two more questions. Sorry, I'm not going to take that one from you.
Back to the small one. I just wanted to add that transparency and openness is not about advocating for the use of animals or not for the promotion of the use of animals. And that's, for me, it's a very clear line we have to have here. It's not to convince anyone it's good, because we all know that the use of animals is not good for that individual animal. But what we are sure, and that's what brings us all to this room, I hope, is because we are all committed. We do it in the best way to promote animal welfare when there is no alternative. As Kirk said, all the regulations at international level, but more focused on Europe and in the US, they are caring for the welfare of animals. And that's the commitment. So what we have to convince people is that whenever they are used the best way it can be done. And that's why questions like these ethical positions that someone was taking there in the back, whether you can use one animal for something that she doesn't understand so well, it can be justified. But when you ask someone that has a relative with cancer, if they want to see some more research to be done to treat that chronic disease, everyone will say, yeah, the best way it can be done. But obviously, all the regulations are already protecting the society to be confident that animals will only be used when there are no other chances. And that's why there are the non-technical summaries, all the replacement criteria of validation. And that's why, as Mena said, ethical revision is one of the strongest tools that any institution can have to prove society that they are looking carefully of what they allow to be done inside their institution.
That is also why there's a debate on the use of animals in education for education purposes, right? So, Gabriela, it will be the last question.
Okay, thanks. So, although I totally understand what Caterina said, and we have the same educational problems also in my university, this is not what I was going to talk about, because I think we are talking here about transparency and openness. So I have heard, and I agree, of course, that there are some lines that you have to respect when you talk to different publics. But then my question is, and it's also for Kirk, is this, meaning, if every institute just makes a list of the animals that it uses, is this enough to be considered transparency? I think that maybe it's not enough. It's very nice to show a mouse in a cage to the public, but maybe we should go a little bit further, because I don't think that PETA will think it's enough to know about what's happening in an institute if you just list that you use zebrafish and mice and that. So maybe we need a little bit more, although the line is difficult to trace, but I mean, I think it's not enough, is it?
No, I agree, and this may seem controversial, but I don't necessarily think having a good website is being proactive, really, because you have to go looking for it to find it. And obviously it acts as a defense for your institution if you're accused of hiding your research, because it's there. But I think we need to be much more proactive than in the past. And traditionally this area of communicating animal research was seen to be a risky business. There's a risk for a researcher of talking about it, or there's a risk of an institution publicly talking about the fact that it uses animals in research. And I want to kind of flip that, and I think it's a risk not to talk about it. It's a risk for the scientific community, and it's a risk for society that we don't talk about it, because the forces who want to stop us doing animal research are unfortunately growing. So if you want to talk about the precautionary principle, I think we need to be much more proactive, and there are various things that we can do. The EARA handbook lists them, and I think we need to be much more proactive. A website is good, but you need to know it's there to find it. And I think we all need to be much more proactive in what we do, and the risk is not doing it rather than keeping quiet.
Thank you. So, Kirk, I asked you to do a closing note. That already sounded like a pretty good. But please go ahead on behalf of EARA.
Yes, so thank you very much for turning up. I hope you've heard from three good speakers about why and how you should be open about your research. As I said before, I think the risk is not to talk about it. I'd like to thank the Champalimaud for organising this and the other institutions for supporting us. So thank you very much. Follow the EARA Twitter and come downstairs and have a bite to eat and a drink.
Yes, thank you.